Hi everyone, and welcome to English with Jack. My mission here is to guide you towards speaking natural, fluent English that sounds authentic and confident. Today we are going to listen to a story called The DIY Disaster. This narrative is designed to show you how native speakers describe tasks that are easy or difficult, focusing specifically on a very popular idiom, while helping you learn vocabulary related to moving house and home improvements. Felix stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by brown cardboard boxes. He and his girlfriend, Fiona, had just moved into a lovely new flat in the centre of Bristol. It was a beautiful space with high ceilings and large windows, but currently it looked like a warehouse. The doorbell rang, echoing through the empty hallway. Felix rushed to answer it, returning moments later dragging two incredibly heavy boxes across the floor. These boxes contained their new wardrobe, which arrived in what is known as flat-pack furniture. This means the furniture comes in pieces and you must build it yourself. Fiona looked at the size of the boxes and felt a wave of anxiety. She opened the top box and pulled out a thick instruction manual that looked more like a novel than a guide.
Fiona suggested they make a cup of tea and read the instructions carefully before starting. Felix shook his head and laughed. He told her to relax because assembling a wardrobe was just like building with children's blocks. He looked her in the eye and promised that this job would be a piece of cake. In British English, when we say something is a piece of cake, we mean it is incredibly easy to do and requires very little effort. Felix was absolutely certain that he did not need the instructions. He ripped open the plastic bags containing hundreds of screws, wooden pegs, and metal hinges, dumping them all into a giant pile on the carpet. Fiona watched him with crossed arms. She tried to explain that sorting the pieces first was essential for such a large project. Felix ignored her advice, grabbed a screwdriver, and picked up two random pieces of wood. He was whistling a happy tune, fully convinced that within an hour their clothes would be neatly organized in the new wardrobe. He connected two panels, but they didn't seem to fit quite right. He forced them together anyway, confident that his intuition was better than the manufacturer's guide. 2 hours later, the atmosphere in the new flat had changed completely. It was no longer a happy scene filled with whistling and optimism. The sun had moved across the large windows, casting long shadows over the chaos in the living room. The wardrobe was technically standing upright, but it looked terrible. It was leaning dangerously to the left, looking extremely wonky. In British English, wonky is a great word to describe something that is not straight or steady. Felix was sitting on the floor, holding his head in his hands. He was surrounded by leftover screws and wooden pegs that definitely should have been used somewhere in the construction. Fiona sat on the sofa, sipping a cup of tea and trying hard not to laugh. She pointed at the bottom drawer, which refused to close properly. She asked him gently if he wanted to look at the manual now. Felix grunted and stood up, walking around the structure to inspect his work. He tried to push the drawer shut, but it made a loud cracking noise and stuck fast. He realized that he had installed the runners upside down. To make matters worse, he noticed that the back panel, which was just a thin sheet of wood, was facing the wrong way. The white side was on the outside, and the brown, unfinished side was visible inside the wardrobe.
Felix let out a long, frustrated sigh.
He admitted that perhaps this task was not quite the piece of cake he had predicted earlier. He had assumed that because the design looked simple, the assembly would be effortless. Now he was tired, his thumb was throbbing where he had hit it with the hammer, and they had a wardrobe that looked like it might collapse if anyone sneezed near it. He looked at the pile of instructions he had thrown away earlier. He picked up the booklet, smoothed out the crumpled pages, and looked at Fiona with an apologetic smile. He finally accepted that he needed help and that they would probably have to take the whole thing apart and start again from the beginning. It took them nearly an hour just to dismantle the wonky wardrobe. Felix had screwed the bolts in so tightly that removing them required a lot of strength and patience. The room was silent, apart from the squeak of the screwdriver and the occasional heavy sigh from Felix. Once all the pieces were back on the floor, separated into neat piles, the mood in the flat began to lift. Fiona took charge of the instruction booklet, reading out the steps clearly, while Felix followed her directions precisely. He no longer rushed. Instead, he double-checked every diagram to ensure he was using the correct screw for the correct hole. They worked together as a team as the evening turned into night. They realized that while the job wasn't exactly difficult, it required attention to detail. It wasn't a 5-minute job, but doing it correctly felt much more satisfying. Slowly, the frame rose from the floor, straight and sturdy this time. They attached the back panel with the white side facing inwards, just as it was supposed to be. When Felix slid the drawers into place, they glided smoothly on their runners and closed with a satisfying click. There were no leftover screws on the carpet, which was a very good sign. They stepped back to admire their work. It was perfect. Felix put his arm around Fiona and apologized again for being so stubborn earlier. He admitted that listening to her and following the guide had saved the day. He laughed and said that while the actual construction wasn't too hard when you followed the rules, managing his own patience had definitely not been a piece of cake. They were both exhausted but happy. They decided to celebrate their success by ordering a takeaway pizza, enjoying their new flat, which finally felt a little bit more like a home. That brings us to the end of our story for today. I hope you enjoyed following Felix and Fiona on their furniture building journey, and that you didn't find their struggle too stressful. Notice how Felix used the idiom "a piece of cake" at the beginning to claim the task would be incredibly easy, only to discover that confidence alone isn't enough to build a wardrobe. It is a fantastic phrase to use when you want to tell someone that a task requires zero effort. If you found this lesson helpful, please remember to click the like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories. It really helps me create more content for you. See you in the next lesson.